Hey everyone, this is in response to the Converse Nature book tag. Thank you to Philip Chase for tagging me. Before we begin, I'd like to tag really good and unkind, either Cal or Terry, doesn't matter. You're tagged. The premise of the tag is what book shaped you as a teenager, and by doing so, shape the way in which you look at literature in general. So, I narrowed down this to 6 books that I read as a teenager. The first one is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Vernes. What shaped me the most about this book, what influenced me the most, is that, well, this is science fiction, or at least it was science fiction when it was written. So I find really impressive how somebody from that time just let their imagination play with things that were plausible but still unknown in terms of technology, of aspects of the physical world that were sufficiently understood at that time, and then give them this verisimilitude by the way in which he describes every aspect of this. It is sort of as if the consistent way of describing things gives some degree of verisimilitude, which I found really powerful at that age. It was like 13. And I think that's part of what motivated me to go into science fiction eventually. And the power of description in speculative fiction. The next one is Gabriel García Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, Cien años de soledad. This one is a big one. I'm actually summarizing an entire genre that I love and grew up reading in this one book. Obviously, the genre is magical realism, Latin American magical realism. I read a lot. Many works by Garcia Marquez, but also works by Isabel Allende and by Mario Vargas Llosa. Those are the big 3, I would say. But this one, 100 Years of Solitude, what influenced me the most about it? First, I think it was the first major book in which you had such well-developed and interesting characters, really captivating characters, with so much depth. And now in hindsight, I realize that show don't tell was used like a lot in this book, which was amazing because you actually understood characters instead of reading what they were supposed to be, which gave them this sense of being alive. Aside from that, I think it was my first contact with a topic with which I am really interested in right now, which is metafiction. Now, 100 Years of Solitude doesn't have a very explicit metafictional element. Characters are not aware that they are in a fiction, at least not explicitly. But if you live in a Latin American country, where I'm from Dominican Republic, and if you're aware of politics and recent history, you start reading this book and you find these events, fictional events in the books, that don't have all that lot of meaning inside of the book. They seem like random happenings, like completely fictional, random bubbles that don't particularly connect with the rest of the plot. However, if you analyze them as echoes of things that have happened in Latin America somewhere, sometime, or things that are still happening, then you realize that, well, characters are not aware that they are part of a fiction. The book itself behaves, the narrative behaves as if it knew that there is another reality, namely ours, and it is in conversation with this reality of ours. And by this fictional events, it is actually building commentary on things that happen in our world, in our reality. Aside from that, there is a very strong cultural component here in these books. I read some of the menial things that some of the characters happen to be doing, and I found that, and even the descriptions of the city, of the town, they felt so similar. Now, Garcia Marquez was Colombian. I am Dominican. I've talked with friends that are from Cuba, from Venezuela, from Puerto Rico, and we all agree in the same. Every time you read these descriptions, these characters, these very simple details about everyday life, it sounds so like it could have happened in a town in our country. It's like this cultural element that binds at least the Caribbean part of Latin America. This cultural component that binds us together as a culture is so alive in the pages of the book. And I think this book has shaped me in that way. Not only the cultural component and the start at metafiction, which opened, metaphorically speaking, opened the horizons of what I would expect, what I now expect in fiction, in literature in general, not just fiction in particular, but this kind of depth, this many layer structures in which you can read something and you can find meaning in many different ways. Yeah, culture, but also social commentary and even more deeper ideas. Next one, JRR Tolkien, the Silmarillion. Now, well, I belong to the generation that was growing up when the Peter Jackson's trilogy was coming out. I remember that when I saw The Fellowship of the Ring, I had no idea who Tolkien was or what this universe was. I found The Fellowship of the Ring mind-blowing when I first saw it. But I didn't understand the ending, the finale. So I got home. With time, I tried to do some research, and I discovered that this movie was actually the first of a trilogy, and that it was inspired in books. So I chased the books down, I found them and read them, The Lord of the Rings. Now, I had always been awed by some of the comments in these books that made reference to the very older age of this universe. And I was obsessed with that. I soon found that there was this book, the Silmarillion, a big tome describing the old days. I should say that by then I was also obsessed with mythology, with particularly Norse mythology and Mesopotamian mythology, either Sumerian and Babylonian or Akkadian, mainly those two big groups of mythology. I wasn't particularly a fan of Greek mythology at the time. So when I found the Silmarillion and read it, what impacted me the most was mythologies, as one understands them, grow, let's say, organically. And at some point, most of them are not just fiction, are things that people believe are the case. But to see a single person take influence from many places and build himself a mythology, a creation mythos, a universe that has many thousands of years of history, different cultures, races, their interactions, languages, so much history that manifests many hundreds of years down the line. This nation is in conflict with this other. It set in my mind what I could expect from a book in terms of depth, of complexity, of the kind of things that you could explore in that fictional setting. At this point, I believe it is obvious how this how this influenced me as a reader. You're here in Niflrog's Folly, and I think at this point it's obvious where my username comes from. As I said, I am a fan of the Silmarillion, and I was very into Norse mythology. Niflrog is a word game, a mix between Niflheim, which is the realm of darkness and ice in Norse mythology, and Balrog, the very bad enemy that Gandalf faces in the Fellowship of the Ring. And Niflrog is supposed to be a nice Balrog. Of course, I was 14, 15 when I came up with the nickname. Very juvenile, but that's what it tries to express. A nice Balrog. Anyway, of all the works of fantasy that I read when I was younger, the Silmarillion, without a doubt, is the one that influences me the most, particularly for setting the bar for how deep you can take human imagination and shape it into a book, a series of books, and how intricate you can build this fictional universe and weave into it meaning, beauty in different forms. Next one, it's Victor Hugo, The Misérables. The first way in which I think this book influenced me is due to its size. I had never read something that big. It was really a challenge. And I think it prepared me to digest huge works of literature, not just fiction, but in general. A massive tome. The other thing that I will say that it shaped the way I see literature is it's a book that deals a lot with the political and the psychological. Up to that point, I had not seen a lot of books doing this. Politics, of course, is not necessarily a bipartisan, a multi-partisan scheme. Politics in a more general sense, how politics, the exercise of political power, shapes the lives of individuals. And also the psychological elements. Well, what is a good person? Is a criminal capable of being a good person or not? What is even a criminal? I'm trying not to give away too much of the plot of this book anyway. So yeah, The Misérables was really influential, both in terms of the sheer size of what a fiction book can be, and also in terms of the seriousness, the explicit seriousness that can be explored in a book of fiction. The next one, again, is Spanish, is El Cantar de Mio Cid, The Song of Mio Cid is recognized as the first piece of literature in the Spanish. It's hard to describe what precisely influenced me about this book. I think the main element that influenced me is how it transcends time. This book was written almost 1,000 years ago. Still, you find themes that are common to today. But also how through literature, how through a book, you can kind of form some sort of time capsule and explore things that happened a lot of time ago, and you still got this feeling of something very ancient, still very much alive. Of course, what I read was a modernized version. I could not find the original in ancient Spanish. I would have loved that, but I didn't. Then, of course, it's a song, it's an epic. It's very romantic. It romanticizes things like war. It idealizes things like heroism. Yes, it goes into many things that I myself now am critical towards. But still, it was a very interesting book. It was a very passionate read. I believe that in order for us to be able to criticize this type of things, we need to live them first. And of course, critical as I am of all of this, I still love those books. Even the Silmarillion itself, it's a book I love. I think it's a masterpiece. And of course, Mio Cid is very few things have the reputation, the prestige that this poem has. It's really amazing to read. And finally, this one I read at the very end of my teenage years, even if they qualify. Yes, I think it was 17, 18, so yeah. The later part of that period of my life is the Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. Now, Sartre is famous for the existentialist movement. He was a philosopher, not just a writer, but he didn't specialize particularly in novels. He was a professional philosopher and public intellectual. Of course, in this book, what's he gonna do? He's going to write a very competent novel, but he's going to infuse it until the end with his philosophical branch, existentialism. What I took away from this book, and something that I feel that has been very beneficial for me in terms of how I look at literature, is books are not just plots and characters. They are important elements in books. There's no way around it. Those are very important components, but they're not the final end of books. And an author can use them as tools to build something else. Of course, some writers will tell you that their book is about the characters. Others will tell you that their books are about plot. Others will say that it's both. But there is a possibility that a writer is using both just to talk about something else, to arrive at something else. And that's the feeling I got from the Nausea, always. The book seems a bit dry, slow, and this is actually something I find in some parts of the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the reaction of some of the readers. They will say, well, why is this book so slow? How come nothing happens? This is boring. What I try to argue is that it's not that it is boring, it's that you're expecting fast-paced plot development or action. But this part of the book is not trying to achieve that. It either speaks to feelings or to a concept. It's trying to develop mainly one of these. You find that in the Nausea. The book is slow, not a lot happens. The book focuses a lot on the internal emotional frame or psychological frame of the protagonist. And through it, you not only find yourself identifying with the emotional state of the protagonist through his dialogues, you actually get some exposition to existentialism. So, apart from the literary influence it had on me, I can say it had a philosophical influence. Existentialism is a philosophical movement that I feel very close to. I won't describe myself as an existentialist nowadays, but I will say that I feel pretty close from there. And I believe if you feel close to any one philosophical ideology, it obviously will shape how you look at all literature in one way or another. So I will say the Nausea helped me with those main two elements. It influenced me at the philosophical level, and on the literary level, it taught me what I now in hindsight see as a very important lesson. Not everything is character and plot. There are things behind the surface. And if you read in the appropriate mode or mindset, you can uncover those, provided that there's anything to be discovered. And that's why one tends to focus so much on the depth of a writer, because if there's nothing down there, if there's nothing beneath the surface, then there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're interested in that, like myself, you probably want what you're reading to have that additional layer of meaning behind the plot and the character development. So those 6 are more or less what influenced me the most in my formative years. So we have a ton of magical realism of the Latin American branch, fantasy obviously, science fiction obviously, and let's say philosophy and politics and psychology through these various works. And basically that's it. And yeah, again, I'm tagging Really Good and Kind to make this tag. I would also like to give a shout out to Christine Vallestad. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it well, so if not, let me know in the comments, Christine. I think she's the one that came up with the premise of the tag. So bye for now, and I should have my next video on an interesting Erickson challenge to the Malazan community that happened like 11 months ago, something like that. And I can now finally say, after many months of research, discussion, that the challenge has been solved. And the challenge has to do with the Creep of God and another passage that is profoundly metafictional. So until then, and have a good one.